Yes, it's live now. Yes, Dhiren sir, you can start.
Okay, let's start, Monali. So,
Yes.
our HOD is joining.
Yeah, HOD also has joined Ganesh
Yes.
Bhaskaran. So we can start.
Okay. First of all, I just I welcome all the participants. Then I just welcome our two speaker, Professor David Peterson and Professor Alec Koff. Before our talk, so just I want to introduce Professor David Peterson. In fact, he's very well known to us, but in fact, I like to introduce formally. So David A. Peterson did his PhD from University of California, Berkeley, and he extensively worked on Tibeto-Burman languages of Northeast India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar and China. And he received many grants or fellowship, namely National Science Foundation Documenting Endangered Languages grant, using the structure of verbal complexes to assess linguistic relationship of 4 undocumented languages of Chin State, Burma, 2019 to present, and National Science Foundation Documenting Endangered Languages grant, a documentation of Rangmita in 2014, a National Science Foundation grant to Dartmouth College Career Grant, Chitangan Hill Trek Linguistic Documentation in 2009, and postdoctoral fellowship, Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in 2000, and Fulbright Fellowship for Advanced Research for fieldwork with indigenous languages in Bangladesh in 1999. And he has edited books, and of course, many people are familiar with the wonderful, publication of Professor David. In the 2007, Oxford University Press has published this edited book, Applicative Construction. It's a very wonderful book. And so we use this book for the purpose of research or teaching in the department. And in 2013, Language Typology and Historical Contingency in honor of Johanna Nicholas, and published by John Benjamin's Amsterdam. And he has contributed in many international journals, namely Language, Linguistic Typology, Linguistics of Tibeto-Burman Area, Himalayan Linguistics, and so on. And he has many projects. And in current projects, Grace edited volume of Himalayan linguistics on issues in South Central Tibetan linguistics, and a grammar of Kumi, and future projects, a reference grammar of Mru, a monograph of Rangmita, curation of materials for several languages. And David A. Peterson, who worked on many languages. South Central or Caucasian, Hakalai, then Kumi, Tadim, Zak, Pankwa, Renmita, Lamkang, Lamtuk, Mokang, Jofai, and so on. And other Tibetan languages like Mru, Sokri, Naga, then Mandi, Burma, and so on. And currently he is teaching as faculty in Dartmouth College, United States. And many other things are there, but I'm not, because of time, I'm not mentioning all. Now we should not waste our time, and just I over to our speaker, Professor David A. Peterson. Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh, for that kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see this okay?
Yeah.
Is it clear? Okay, let me know if there's any problem. My internet is usually pretty good here, but sometimes it kicks out for a few seconds. So if I start to be inaudible or whatever, just give me a warning about it. So first, let's see. There we go. Yeah, that's working. Let me first of all thank the conference organizers for inviting me, and I'll thank the participants in advance for what I'm sure will be interesting discussion after I'm finished. And I want to acknowledge my funding, which mostly comes from the U.S. National Science Foundation. And I want to thank my teachers for various languages, especially Kumi and Ringmicha. And I'll try to keep an eye on the time here. Let's see, this is not working perfectly. So I'm going to talk about two issues related to what I call the causative prefix in Kuki-Chin. And from the title, you probably get the impression that I think that there is a Kuki-Chin causative prefix. So there's this widespread but unproductive causative prefix of the form M or P in South Central Tibeto-Burman, the branch of Tibeto-Burman that previously we've called Kuki-Chin, but for various reasons we have taken to recently calling South Central instead. Sometimes there's a vowel in these prefixes or in this prefix. So it usually manifests as a minor syllable in a sesquisyllabic structure with the following verbal root. And you'll hear what that sounds like in Kumi. For instance, in Kumi, there's a verb kang, which is to burn intransitively. So if a tree is burning, you would use that verb. But if somebody burns the tree, the verb is bakang with a P prefix, and you can hear what that sounds like in Kumi. So kang is intransitive, bakang is transitive. In Ringmicha, on the other hand, a fairly closely related language, you have pairs like tau, which is to wake up. That's the intransitive sense of waking up. But if somebody wakes somebody else up, you use matau with an M causative prefix. So P causative prefix in Kumi, M causative prefix in Ringmicha. And clearly these prefixes are related, but which was the original form is something that I thought about for the first few years that I was working with these languages. Now, there is a story from the Tibeto-Burman level that I'll get to eventually, and it basically is that the original form is the P rather than the M. But I have wondered for a long time, is there any way of thinking about this from a South Central internal perspective? Is there any reason to think that it's the P just based on what we see inside South Central without resorting to looking at related languages outside of South Central? The second thing I'll talk about is this unproductive causativization that's signaled by aspiration of an initial voiceless plosive or by devoicing of an initial sonorant. So in Lai, you have pairs like these two, gang, to burn, which is the intransitive version, and kang, which is to burn, the transitive version. And I'm sure many of the people in the audience can hear that there's an inaspirate versus an aspirate initial difference between these two verb roots, or these two verb stems, I guess, not roots, let's call them roots. So one thing that I've wondered about for a long time is what relationship, if any, is there between this phenomenon and the MP causative prefix? So in on this slide, I give you a subgrouping that I've proposed for South Central Tibeto-Burman. The Northwestern languages, or the previously called Old Kuki languages, will be ones that many people are familiar with. Central languages include languages like Lai, which we just looked at, and Mizo. I also group the Moraic languages together with the central languages, but that's not a crucial consideration for my talk. The status of a peripheral group, as I call it, is also not crucial. These could just be separate branches of a relatively unarticulated family tree instead of forming a peripheral subgroup together. But that group includes the Northeastern languages, which contains languages like Tado and Paite, which are languages which will be familiar, but also languages like Tedim and Sezang, which are also well known. And Southeastern and Southwestern languages are not spoken in Northeast India. They're exclusively in Bangladesh and in Burma, although there may be some speakers living in Mizoram for some languages belonging to those groups. So Southeastern languages include languages like Dai, which is well known from Helga So Hartman's grammar of it, and Hyo, which Mohammed Zakaria has recently written an important dissertation on. Southwestern languages include languages like Kumi and Ringmicha, which we started out with, as well as some other languages. So I was going to spend a little bit of time talking about the productive valence affecting constructions that South Central languages tend to have. And I'm not going to do that because I know that I'm already going to be probably a little bit over time. And I don't want to get too out of hand here. So I'm going to skip over most of this portion of the talk, but let me just encourage you, if you are working with speakers or if you're a speaker yourself of any of the South Central languages, this would make a very interesting topic for a conference presentation at NEALS or a journal submission. Let me just talk about one of the examples that I would have talked about, and I'll skip over the others. And if you want me to talk more about them, I can do that in the discussion period. So most of the audience will know that the main South Central speaking area is in approximately this oval, which includes Chin State in the middle of it. It includes Manipur and Mizoram in Northeast India. And it also includes the little sliver of Bangladesh that goes down to the southeast along the Mizoram border and the Chin State and Arakan State borders in Burma. The Chittagong Hill Tracts in particular is where South Central languages are spoken in, the main place where they're spoken in Bangladesh. There may actually be one other place, but I haven't found the speakers yet. Let's see, I've got some maps that show where these languages are spoken. The gray portion of this map is basically that little end of Mizoram that pokes down between Bangladesh and Burma. So this is just to the east of the bottom of that portion of Mizoram. And this is the basically middle portion of Chin State. So Hakka is where Lai is spoken. It's the capital of Chin State, and it's spoken in a very large area in central Chin State, but it's also used as a language of wider communication all over Chin State. In addition to the initial consonant causatives that we just looked at in Lai, it has, I think, 3 verbs that have what I'll call sak causatives in case it comes up in another context. So these have a suffix sak. And it has a productive causative construction based on this element ter, which is presumably cognate with the tir causative that you have in Mizo, if you're familiar with that. But Lai's real richness in terms of valence affecting constructions is in its applicative constructions. And applicative constructions are things like benefactive constructions. So one of the applicatives that Lai has is byak. It marks a benefactive or a malefactive applicative, as in 3a. But the slide shows you there are all these other applicative constructions which have very similar syntax to the benefactive, malefactive applicative construction. So just to take one of them, the committative applicative marked by B in 3c, that one shows you that you've got a companion in weeding the field in this example, or that he had a companion, and that companion was me. The me, instead of being treated as a oblique committative participant, is treated as a direct object of the verb stem of tlotbi. So I'm not going to go through all of these examples, but it's very rich. And other languages that I would have talked about in this part of the talk, we're not going to skip through it very quickly, also have similar systems. So if you have the opportunity to work with, or you're a speaker of one of these South Central languages, that's an excellent area for future research, because we don't know about all of them. And we certainly don't know about the relative richness of languages. So the main part of the talk, or the first main part of the talk, has to do with the MP causative prefix. And what I'll try to do is, first of all, look at the MP variation and distribution. And I'll point out along the way, not so much at the beginning, but later on, I'll start to point out that you see the same pattern also present for nominal and verbal lexical prefixes. So there are M and P lexical prefixes. By lexical prefix in Tibeto-Burman, we mean these elements that are often sesquisyllabic minor syllables which hang off of the beginning of roots and maybe have some vague semantics associated with them, but they're not prefixes in a normal morphological sense. They're, probably they had some meaning, or maybe they were even due to compounding of nouns with following roots. But that's what I mean by lexical prefixes, and you'll see what I mean when we get to some of the examples. Then I'm going to, before I move on to the second part of the talk, which has to do with the other causative phenomenon I mentioned at the beginning, I'll talk briefly about the relevant reconstructed Tibeto-Burman prefixes and what the South Central data suggests, I think. So the first language we'll look at is Kumi. So this is the very bottom of the portion of Bangladesh, which we saw on the map of the overall area. So this is approximately where Kumi is spoken in the southern Chittagong Hill Tracts. And it's also spoken across the border in Myanmar, or Burma. The, let's see, the main place that it's spoken is in Paletwa town, but it's actually spoken widely in the far southwestern corner of Chin State, which is what this map represents. And I should mention the credit for these colorful Chin State maps goes to SIL people working there. So excellent map. Let's see. In Kumi, very straightforwardly, as you see on this slide, there are intransitive roots on the left, and the forms on the right are causativized versions of those roots involving this prefix P. So Kumi has a P prefix for this causative formation. So to take, for instance, 7H, Sha is long, or to be long, and Psha is to lengthen something. We already saw this P prefix in the first example, Gang and Pakang, which I started out with. Now, Kumi also has a T allomorph of this prefix. So be is hot, or to be hot, and to be is to heat something up or to make it hot. So this T allomorph occurs when the root that the prefix is attached to begins with a bilabial or an H. And I basically said this is some sort of dissimilatory process in the paper that I wrote about this phenomenon a number of years ago. Moving to another Southwestern language. So we're looking at Southwestern languages here first. Lami is a language spoken just to the east of Kumi. And at this point, I should mention that one of the reasons I'm thinking about this issue is I'm currently editing a paper by Helga So-Hartmann that she wrote before passing away, unfortunately, a few years ago. And it's going to be included in the Himalayan Linguistics Journal issue that Professor Singh mentioned in his introduction. That will hopefully be appearing about the middle of this year. So some of the data in this talk comes from Helga's paper, including this Lami data. So Lami has a prefix very similar to the Kumi prefix, which either has a nasal consonant or it has a B. And I'm not sure what the extent of the variation is between these. Helga's description of it is simply that it can be either one, but she uses the M one in her examples. And so that's what I have here. So to take 9G, just to look at one of these more carefully. So Ri is Y is afraid. That's maybe a root that people will recognize. And Mari actually means, according to her gloss, X threatens Y. So it's not just to make someone afraid, it's to threaten them specifically. There can be some slight deviation in the semantics of the causative forms compared to the simplex non-causative forms. That's not unexpected. And if you've been at a talk that I've given before, you'll notice that so far I haven't actually given you any full sentences in any of these languages, which is very uncharacteristic for me. But Helga provided a couple of sentences that I give you here in 10 to show you how these work in Lami. So in the 10a sentence, koi is to be full, so an intransitive verb. And the makoi causative version of that verb that you see in 10b is a transitive verb. Right? These look like elicited examples, not text examples, but they will do. Lami also has a T allomorph, and it looks like it has this very similar distribution to what we see in Kumi. It occurs before bilabial initial roots and also before H initial roots. So Mrokemi, a little further to the south from Kumi and Lami, is very similar, and I'm going to go through it very quickly in the interest of time, because I'll run out of time otherwise. There's an M prefix that occurs in the causative forms. There's also a T allomorph in Mrokemi. So very, very similar. Let's see, Ringmicha, a very endangered language spoken in southern Bangladesh, southeastern Bangladesh. There may be 5 to 10 speakers remaining of this language, and I've been working on documenting it. So I actually have very different data for this language. I don't have so many word lists that might show you the causative prefix the way I have for the previous languages, but there are lots of instances of this M prefix. There aren't actually instances of a T allomorph in this language, that, as far as I'm aware. And I can, if you ask me about it in the discussion period, I can maybe account for why there aren't T prefixes in this language. But 14a shows you plot. So plot means to escape, and maplot means to let go or to allow to escape, to let escape. Yaw is to float, or sorry, not yaw. Yao is to float, and mayao is to float something off in a transitive sense, right? So not a intransitive use of float, but the transitive sense of float. Let's see. Now, those were all Southwestern languages. Southeastern languages like Dai, which is spoken to the east of Mrokemi and Lami, has an M prefix as well. And let's see which one of these is good to look at. We can just take the first one, do, X is good, mdo, Y makes X well. This is again data that comes from Helga So Hartmann. Ko, spoken a little bit further to the east, is also has an M causative prefix. Although I'll talk about Ko towards the very end of the talk because it has a complication, which I'll need to go into. Let's see, keeping an eye on the time here. So again, just an M causative prefix that you see in the forms on the right compared to the forms on the left. Moving a bit to the north, so this is again the central part of Chin State. Mara has a P causative prefix, a Pa element that you see in the forms on the right. So Acha, X cries, Apacha, Y causes X to cry. And I haven't been mentioning it so far, but if you look at nouns and other verbs that would have had either a P or an M prefix in these languages, the languages are, as far as I know, consistent. So I can't say for Dai and for Lami and for Merokimi whether that's necessarily the case because the data isn't collected in such a way that I can consult it easily. But in Kumi, all M and P prefix words have a P prefix in them. The same thing goes for Mara, and I haven't provided examples on this slide, but it's very easy if you consult any of the materials that are available for Mara. There are lots of, there are P prefixes, not M prefixes. Zope, spoken to the north of Mara, also a Moraic language. As the name Mara implies, Mara is a Moraic language. Zope also is Moraic, and Samson Lotvin provided me with a list of non-causative and causative pairs that he's turned up in a variety of Zope that he's worked with. So for instance, let's take the example 18I, so tsa is dry and patsa is to dry something or to cure something. So you see that, again, you've got a P prefix in this language. Let's see. Now, turning to the Northwestern languages, these again are the languages that many people will be familiar with here. The Northwestern language is very complicated, and Linda Connerth in 2019, in a talk she gave, presented the following kind of breakdown that she was assuming at that point for them. But this isn't a claim that Linda still believes this, but this is just from that talk. There are the groupings that you see here for languages, which I think will be familiar to lots of people. And the languages highlighted in blue, Lamkang, Tarao, Chiru, and Koireng, are the languages that there's the most secure evidence for in terms of this causative prefix. And that's what I'll turn to now. So sorry, I don't have a very colorful map for Manipur. Maybe somebody has one and can share it with me. I stole this one from Professor Haukip's paper on the languages of Manipur from Linguistics of the Tibeto-Burman Area a number of years ago. And I've tried to put in these languages in approximately their location, with the caveat that some of these languages are more complicated in terms of their placement. So Chiru isn't spoken just where I have Chiru on the map here. There are other places, and the same thing for Koireng. I think that's approximately where one of the places Koireng is spoken. I haven't even included Tado on here, which I'll get to shortly, I hope, because Tado is spoken in many different places in Manipur. Sorbong also isn't in Linda's list of languages, and that's possibly because Mortensen and Keogh are not certain themselves of whether Sorbong ought to be considered a South Central language or if it's a type of Tangkulic language, so related to Tangkul Naga varieties. And it definitely has lots of contact features due to that connection with Tangkulic languages, but to my eyes, it looks pretty securely South Central. And it's got an M prefix for these causatives. So E, for instance, to be afraid, that's the same afraid as we saw in a language before that where it was ri. Here, Q to be afraid and makyu to make afraid. And looking at the nouns and verbs that would have M or P prefixes, there actually is a little bit of variation. So a couple of them turn up with a B prefix and others turn up with the M prefix, with the M prefix dominating. Lamkang, here are a few forms that are from the monograph that Harimon Tonajom and Shobhanachalia put together a number of years ago. So Chen to run, but Chen cause to run. So Lamkang has a P version of this causative prefix, and there are a few words that I spot in their glossary at the bottom here that also have P prefixes in them. Let's see. There are actually many more instances than just these that Shobhanachalia kindly provided me with, but I didn't have time to put them in the slide, so they're not here. But there are others. Chiru Awan, in his recent dissertation, talks about a ma prefix, ma causative prefix. It doesn't just have the MA form, it also shows some vowel harmony. I haven't included those examples here. And again, if you look at the forms at the bottom, you see that the likely suspects all have M prefixes, just as the causative involves M prefix. Kareng in Yashwanta Singh's grammar of it shows a very interesting form for the prefix, namely a prefix that ends in a nasal. So instead of just being M vowel, you instead have min for the what's presumably the same causative prefix. And there are only a few forms in the glossary which I think are relevant, but one of them shows the N at the end of the prefix as well. The others do not. Tarao, a very interesting prefix, another grammar by Yashwanta Singh, the Kim causative prefix. So very interestingly, Tarao seems to have stuck a key onto the beginning of this prefix for some reason. Actually, most of the valence affecting morphology in this language starts with a K. So I wonder if this is maybe the nominalizer K that we see in Northeast India quite prevalently. But anyway, I'm not sure why we've been nominalizing these things. But if you look through the glossary, you see that the likely suspects in nouns that would have prefixes actually pretty consistently have M prefixes. And there are actually a few forms in the glossary which, in the word list of the grammar, which are clearly causative themselves. So matup, to me, in particular, looks like a clear causative of an intransitive verb tup. Actually, I need to check the grammar to see if tup can mean hide as well. But manu looks like a causative of a verb to see, right? So nu is a good South Central root for to see. New in kumi, for instance, is the cognate with it. So, at this point, before I conclude the first part of the talk here, and I'm hopefully not getting too far behind, there are relevant Tibeto-Burman prefixes, and I just want to say something very quickly about these. So there's an M prefix, which for verbs typically is a detransitivizer in Tibeto-Burman languages, so not a transitivizer. And there is also, but it also occurs with some nouns. So for instance, the roots liver and heart, Matisoff reconstructs with an M prefix. So in languages that have the M causative prefix, oops, I've gotten too far ahead here. That have the M causative prefix, words that you expect to have that M all have the M. But words which have the P causative prefix in languages that have the P causative prefix, words which you would expect to have the M lexical prefix turn out to have a P. So in Kumi, even though we expect liver and heart to have an M at the beginning of them, they instead have a P prefix. So Matung and Paliung, Patung and Paliung. There's also a B prefix, which is reconstructed to Proto-Tibeto-Burman, and it occurs in words like for and rat. True to form, it retains a P prefix, which is the reflex of the Proto-B prefix in South Central in Kumi, right? So Kumi has a P causative prefix, and it keeps the P in the words for rat and for, so Bali and Baju. In languages that have the M causative prefix, however, this B turns into an M. So Matisoff recognizes that there is a P causative prefix, which has arisen more or less independently in a number of places in the Northeast India, Bangladesh, Burma borderland area. I've included here on this slide how he accounts for what we see going on with the M and the P prefixes in South Central. So assuming that it's originally a P causative prefix descending from a reconstructed root beginning with a B, which means to give, and give is a good causative source. So that looks like what we want to say. There, as Matisoff says, there has been considerable confusion between the labial stop and the labial nasal prefixes in several branches of Tibeto-Burman, with various languages showing mergers of the two, either in favor of the stop or of the nasal. He includes languages like Lakher, which is Mara, which we saw before, where both of these prefixes end up with a P, and languages like Rangkhul, where they both end up with an M. I'm not sure what his evidence from Rangkhul is, maybe the Linguistic Survey of India, but I've not included Rangkhul in this talk. So on the face of it, that's actually a little bit surprising. So you have Northwestern languages and Southeastern languages in South Central, which have seemingly independently completely regularized the treatment of the M and the Proto-M and the Proto-B prefixes. So whether it's nouns or verbs, you end up with M in those languages. And you also have languages in the Southwest and languages in the Northwest where you've completely regularized things, it looks like, as P. So that this is something that if you're working with South Central languages, you should look into for your language. Is there any inconsistency in your language, or is it true that across the board all of the languages behave this way? I don't know what the answer to that question is. So some further thoughts before we move on to the other thing that I want to talk about. The Koireng form suggests that the prefix perhaps originally began with a P and maybe had a nasal as well, which led to the development of an M reflex. So it's the N at the end of that prefix. I don't know that there's any South Central external evidence for this, but I would also be interested to see, is there any other internal evidence for some kind of nasal element? So that would be, one motivation for why P would turn into an M, for instance, which apparently has happened here. I would suggest also that the T allomorphs that we saw in Kumi, Lami, and Mro-Khmer suggest that the original form had an oral plosive in it rather than a nasal. So for whatever reason, in those languages, you haven't taken that T and converted it into an N, like you've taken the P and converted it into an M. Maybe the oral stop quality of that allomorph is a relic of the original form of this prefix. Some South Central internal evidence that this really was a P prefix rather than an M prefix. And then there's also the MB variation that I mentioned in Lami. So remember in Lami, the prefix is either pronounced ma or it's pronounced ba. And so maybe the ba variant there points to this being an oral stop originally rather than a nasal stop. And South Central external comparison, I've already mentioned, I think, suggests that the original form involved P rather than M. Matisoff makes this clear in his discussion of this. So Carby has a P initial causative prefix, Mru has a P causative prefix. There's a P causative prefix in Angami, P vowel. So these are simply parallel developments or due to areal spread rather than something that's shared between the language groups most likely. And it's not unlikely that you know, a verb to give would independently grammaticalize as a causative in these different language groups. So the second part, hopefully I'm not going to go too far over time here, is the S causative hypothesis. I'll try to be very quick with it. There's this other causative pattern we saw at the beginning involving initial plosive aspiration and sonorant devoicing. And the source for this is widely assumed to be the Tibeto-Burman S causative, the famous S causative prefix that all of these people cited talk about. And one of the places in South Central that it's best attested is in Hyo. So in Hyo, Zakaria was kind enough to provide me with a list of verbs that involve the S causative or hypothetical S causative prefix. So one of my favorites is the verb come, number 5, 25.5 here. Come meaning to make descend. The intransitive version of this verb is gum. So to go down is gum. I'm sorry, I'm getting the tone wrong, but I think Zakaria will forgive me. So gum intransitive, come transitive. And you also have sonorant devoicing. So for instance, number 13, dance intransitive is lom, and to make somebody dance is shom with a voiceless L at the beginning of it. So either initial plosive aspiration or sonorant devoicing is what this causative pattern involves. And I already showed you this for lai, the gang kang example that we looked at. Oops, I've neglected to change the capital T's to retroflex or post-alveolar T's in the bottom of this slide. But so Q at the bottom of the slide, this is that fear root that we saw before in a couple of languages which had M prefixes, I think, in both cases. So D is to be afraid or to be scared. T is to frighten somebody or to scare somebody. So if you look through this list, you'll see there are also R's that devoice initially, L's that devoice initially, and nasals that devoice initially. So for instance, nem, H is soft, and nem is to, well, that's actually got some strange semantics associated with it. So to comfort somebody is to make somebody soft, I guess. So not exactly transparent causative semantics there, but most of them are fairly transparent. Now, Changde mentions in her dissertation some instances of this pattern, but I don't seem to be able to find a full list of them in her dissertation. So if Tangi Changde is here, maybe in the discussion portion, she can tell us what some of the other verbs are. There's also a T causative prefix, which probably means to do in older sources for Mizo, but again, I'm not sure if Changde discusses this in her dissertation. I'm going to skip over Sentang, which is spoken just to the south of Lai, and it's a Moraic language as well. It's got some interesting evidence for this alternation there, but I'm going to skip ahead to northeastern South Central, which is the other place that this is attested. So in Tedim, so this is the a bit further to the north. So the pink at the bottom of this slide is the top extent of Lai. So this is the northern portion of Chin State. So Tedim, made famous by Henderson's description of it, has the alternation in forms like 29D, puk, to fall, and puk, to fell. So to cut down a tree or to make fall down. Sizang, just to the east, also has some forms. So at the bottom, gang is to burn and kang is to burn, just like in Lai. So these languages have lost the distinction between voiceless and voiced sonorants, and so they don't have as many forms that they could possibly show us this alternation for. So it's just seen in the plosives, as far as I know. And the other Northeastern languages, so Tado, I will be curious to hear if there are any remnants of this, especially with plosive initials. So voiceless, plosive, inaspirate, non-causative, and voiceless, plosive, aspirate, causative is what the pattern would be. And you might have noticed by now that there is a nearly complementary distribution to the hypothetical S causative pattern and the P causative pattern that we looked at before. So could one of the other hosts, thank you. Let's see, the non-complementary distribution occurs in just a couple of very small, obscure places. So in Dai, Helge Hartmann cited a few forms where you seem to have devoicing of initial sonorants or voicing, aspiration of initial plosives, which gets you causativization. So 31b, lut, apparently can causativize as flut. So I think she neglected to include the verb in her translation for flut, but looks like an S causative prefix. Kyum, meaning to be inside, and kyum, to put inside, to show the, won't go through all of those, but it shows the same sort of pattern that you expect with the S causative, but there are very few in number. But there are also in Dai instances where devoicing of an initial consonant is accompanied by prefixation. So the M prefix occurs and you get devoicing of an initial sonorant or aspiration of an initial plosive. So kyum, to descend, you may remember from hyo, the verb kum. Kyum in Dai is causativized by prefixing M and aspirating the initial of the root. So mkyum. Let's see, the next slide shows from her 2013 paper, Helga included some other examples of this. So there are, it's not just those forms, there are some other instances where this combined M prefixation and aspiration happens, including what she has in 31b, so enter. So enter can either apparently just aspirate the initial consonant, or it can aspirate the, devoice the initial consonant, or it can devoice the initial consonant and use the M prefix. So that's one place of overlap between these two patterns. The other place of overlap is in the closely related Ko, so spoken just to the east of Dai. In this language, Jordan recognizes the M causative prefix, but for M initial roots, he says, you don't get prefixation of the M. You instead devoice the initial M of the root. So 34b, ma, to be first, ma, to place first. And then there are a few forms where K's aspirate, and there's also palatalization that's involved in these forms as well. I can talk about more of it later on if necessary, if you ask me about it. So from this, I would like to conclude that it seems at least some of the instances of the hypothetical proto-S causative prefix pattern might be attributable to the already highly reconstruction-worthy P prefix. So I hope, I haven't said it, but I hope you'll agree with me that the P prefix is presumably a Proto-Kuki-Chen piece of morphology. So there's one slight issue that I want to mention, which is a causative prefix in Tado, which, as I was thinking about these issues, I went back to Hodson's 1905 grammar of And I was reminded something that I noticed a long time ago, which is that there seems to be a su or shu causative in Tado. And the grammar makes it very clear. And I immediately emailed Professor Haukyup, and he assured me, yes, there is a su causative prefix. And I won't quote him as saying, he says it's very, I won't quote him as saying that it's very productive, but maybe in the discussion period, we can talk about whether it is very productive or just slightly productive or what. But apparently it also, this su also occurs in Paite, and in another Singh's grammar of this, not Yashwanta Singh, this is discussed under compound verbs, so it's not immediately identifiable as a causative prefix, but the examples in A here, so vom to be black and suvom to blacken, or to make black, basically. And it involves, so su apparently involves some purposeful causation, right? And the author of the grammar describes this as to strike with, as the grammaticalization source. And there are also apparently he, to do causatives, which are very similar in the language, that is reminiscent of the miso t causatives that I mentioned. So a few observations. This S causative pattern is, sorry, the S proto-S causative pattern that we talked about before the Tado examples is non-productive, whereas this northeastern pattern is at least reportedly productive, or relatively productive. So all of the descriptions of it that I've heard seem to make it seem fairly productive. The northeastern pattern, so what we see in Tado and in Paite, seems quite localized. And I speculate about whether it maybe exists alongside the other S causative phenomenon that we talked about. And so I asked Zakaria to consult with Kosei Otsuka, who he's currently working with in Japan. And Otsuka reports that there are possibly lexicalized tedim usages of su. So Otsuka has worked extensively with tedim. And he cites a form supuk to knock down, and potentially this su portion is from the verb pound or hit, which I think it also corresponds to in Tado. So tedim is definitely a language where this potentially co-occurs with the S causative prefix anyway, and therefore I would suspect that these are not the same thing. And so what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think that the su pattern that we see in Northeastern can explain the S causative patterns that we see in other languages that have it. So let me just conclude. I'm sure I'm way over time, and forgive me for that. So I want to conclude that it makes little sense, I think, to attribute the patterns that we see in Central and Northeastern languages to the S causative prefix exclusively, when we see that the P causative prefix is synchronically able to cause similar sorts of things to happen in Dai and Ho. I don't want to claim that there's no chance that any of these have an S causative prefix as their origin, but I just feel like we're not making use of what Proto-Kuki-Chin must have had in claiming that. So in the middle of this slide, saying that at least some of the alternations in Central and Northeastern languages are due to a previous P causative prefix tells a story for the distribution that we see, where there's virtually no overlap between the patterns. On the other hand, the S causative prefix account of the forms that we see in Central and Northeastern, this doesn't allow us to tell a story for this virtually complementary distribution. And then what I said just a second ago, the su and the E causatives in the Northeastern languages, I think, look more recent than something which would result in the residue that's left from a hypothetical S causative prefix. And with that, I will stop talking. And thank you very much for coming to my talk. And let the moderators take over again, and we can open up for discussion.
Thank you, Professor David Peterson, for your elaborate insight. So now the paper is open for discussion. And please unmute yourself and you ask questions to this paper.
Okay, can I come in, Professor Dhiren?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Dave, for the the issue is quite
I'm afraid I can't hear you, Patang. I don't know if it's my internet or...
Can you please text the question, Haukib, so that it will be easier
that is also
to...
one possible,
Okay, let me repeat it.
Yes.
I lost the line. So the su prefix is quite productive in Thado, except that as of now, it appears to me that su prefix occurs only with malaffective verbs when the object is at the receiving side. So something like I beat somebody and then I made somebody cry, kind of thing. But if I put it as I made somebody happy, this will not appear. So it occurs with some kind of malaffective verbs, not with malaffective with non-effective verbs. And this is one thing that I observe as you go ahead with the presentation. So that is the clarification from my side. And another question that I have for you, this is just a comment, is that this what you call prefix ma, which I've already noted in my chat also. This occur with what if animal name with any as animal prefix and also body part prefix, and then it occurs with some verbs. Is there any correlationship between these ma prefix which occur as a causative marker in many of the languages that you saw, and those occurring with the nouns or other categories? So are there any correlationship?
Yeah, so if I can jump in, so you do have nouns that involve the M prefix, and you have nouns that involve the B prefix at the Proto-Tibeto-Burman level. With the very few exceptions that I've noticed, it seems to be fairly consistent that if a language has the M causative prefix, all of the nouns and verbs that would have either an M or a P prefix end up with an M prefix. On the other hand, if a language has the P causative prefix, then all of the nouns and verbs that you would expect to have either a P or an M end up with a P prefix. So you're saying that there are nouns with M prefixes, animals and body parts in Thado. Is that right, Patang? Is that what you're saying?
For Kuki-Chin languages of Barak Valley, not for Thado, for Barak Valley Kuki-Chin languages, all Kuki-Chin languages of Barak Valley.
So my expectation would be is if they have that, so for instance, if they have an M both for heart and for then I would expect them to have an M causative prefix if they have any causative prefix.
One thing that I'm not sure as of now is I haven't seen M functioning as a causative prefix, but what we found is ma occurring as a noun prefix. Mainly,
Yeah, well, I mean, if it occurs with nouns, so languages tend to have either M prefixes or P prefixes, I think is safe to say, if they have prefixes at all. Another interesting thing that I neglected to mention about the Northeastern languages and the Central languages is they tend not to have prefixes. Very uniformly, they have lost prefixes. And that's maybe also related to, why they don't exhibit this causative prefix, and why the causative prefix might have transferred itself somehow to the initial consonants as either aspiration or voicing. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question adequately, Patang, but.
Very much, very much. Okay, thank you.
So can I ask, sorry, can I ask one question of Paotong? So can you think of any verbs that involve either the aspiration or the, you wouldn't have initial sonorant devoicing. I don't think you have voiceless sonorants in Tado, right?
No, no, those are not there.
Yeah.
That is the what you call the contrast between the so-called northern Kuki-Chin languages that I know of. None of these languages have this sonority contrast to mark either what you call positive or the other way. So this is found mainly in your example in your data from southern Chin, not from northern Chin. I'm not aware of such a contrast between sonority with voicing or devoicing or aspiration and the like. Yeah.
Okay, if you run into any, please let me know.
Okay, sure.
Can I?
So there are some questions. Oh, yeah, please.
Oh yeah. Can I just make a short comment?
Yes.
It's Guillaume Jacques. Yeah. So just my comment concerns the link I sent to a recent article of mine about precisely the labial causatives in Sino-Tibetan languages as a whole. Yeah.
Great.
You can have a look in the chat. So it's published in the journals of DSeals. So so I fully agree that some of the labial causatives, as suggested by Matisoff and others, might be a recent grammaticalization from verb to give in some cases, but a possibility that I wanted to propose is that it could be related to a labial causative we find in Garongek languages, and where actually we have both productive sibilant causative and a voicing alternation, anti-causative prenasalization, and this labial causative with slightly different values. So the labial causative is only used with well, adjectival stative verbs. Yeah, and the sibilant causatives is extremely productive. It can be applied to all verbs, and a few verbs can have both, with interesting differences. So that's just food for thought. I mean, this is very tentative study.
Very interesting.
Just to see that it may not be the case that all of these forms are innovations. Some of them might have some degree of antiquity, and I discuss Kuki-Chin data in this article.
Could I ask? That's very interesting. And so for the languages that I'm most familiar with, I have not noticed any verb class breakdown in terms of where these occur. So in Kumi and Ringmicha, well, Ringmicha there's less data, but in Kumi there, it's relatively productive in Kumi. So it may have even expanded, you know, beyond what Proto-Kuki-Chen used it for. The labial prefix in Jalronic that you reconstruct, is that is it also from the verb to give, or is it from a different source?
No, well, its source is unknown, just like the sibilant causative.
So one thing I neglected to mention, or I avoided mentioning because I didn't want to go too far out on a limb, was I wonder whether this is actually from the verb to give at all in Kuki-Chen anyway. So the Koi Reng form with the final nasal, that's very minimal suggestion that it wasn't just the verb P or whatever, which would be the verb that it must have grammaticalized from. I mean, I like give as the grammaticalization source for it, but if it had an eng at the end of it or something, or an m at the end of it or whatever, then that would be different from the verb give. I mean, it would be something else. yeah, I won't speculate any further about what it is, but if it had a nasal at the end of it, it might not be the verb give anyway. So there might be some other grammaticalization source for it.
Just one. Sorry to take some time, but from what I've read of Bodo Garo, it seems that some Bodo Garo languages with this P prefix, someone has cited forms.
Dimasa, I think.
Yeah, you've got that in Bodo, in Dimasa, etc. And what I've seen concerns mostly adjectives too. So there's an article by Scott about that, and also the recent Bodo grammar. So it was strikingly similar to what we see in Garungic in this regard, but that may also be a coincidence. I'm not claiming it's related, but still, I think it deserves to be mentioned.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat box.
Let's see.
Let's see.
So I'm actually not able to access the entire chat here, it seems. So I wonder if you could read the relevant questions to me.
Yeah, just I'll read.
So let me try a different view here.
This is from Jack's. There is evidence of a label causative prefix also in Gelrongic languages, which may or may not be related to the prefix.
Yeah, sorry, I think that's Guillaume's question.
In Norris Indian University. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no, in the meantime, while you are searching for questions, I just want to pose one curious question to Dave. What could be the diachronic reasons for Kuki-Chin languages which exhibit lots of prefixes, whether verbal prefixes or noun prefixes, versus those languages which don't exhibit them? What could be diachronic reasons for this?
Oh, well, they lost them. The languages that don't have them. That's the basic story that I would tell for that. Exactly why they would lose the prefixes. Maybe it has to do with issues of prosody. Maybe they're in a, there are these minor syllables. Maybe there's some kind of aspect of metrical structure which causes the attrition of these prefixes.
Okay, so you're attributing
Alec has an idea, maybe.
Okay, Alec.
Yeah.
Now I've got a related question. Normally, like at least with the languages that I'm familiar with, a little to the north, when these are head final languages, just like you've got head final languages, and when you okay, so the causatives that I find in the languages that I'm familiar with, you've got V1, V2 compound. And V2 is the target of grammaticalization, and they develop as suffixes once they're grammaticalized. But I'm wondering about explanations for if you've got the same kind of thing happening with grammaticalization in similarly head final languages. How do you explain the development of prefixes in these languages?
Well, it's so. This relates to a question that I asked Matthew Dreyer once. So Matthew Dreyer, of course, a renowned expert about word order issues. And so it always struck me as strange that you could get prefixes in verb final languages where you would expect these things to grammaticalize as suffixes, as I think you're saying, Alec. And Matthew's answer to me was that it actually isn't a correlation. So I haven't tested this myself. I don't have a large database like Matthew had, but he told me that it was a non-starter because it actually having causatives grammaticalizing as suffixes, it actually just didn't correlate. So there could be some substrate influence of some other language group, or I might mention that Mru is actually verb medial. It's not verb final, and so Mru is in contact with the southern languages, but that wouldn't account for why you get prefixes in other places. And you have, as I think I mentioned, you've got independent developments of these prefixes in all sorts of places. So yeah, so I'm not sure if Matthew still thinks that, but that's what he told me when I asked him about how do I explain the fact that
on this topic, actually, Garangic languages offer interesting evidence for the how heavily verb final languages, very strictly verb final languages, can develop prefixes. So I just put in the chat an article by myself in Linguistic Typology. It's precisely on this topic about harmonization, disharmonization of inflection. And also there is an article by Lion Fan, which is to appear in Linguistic Typology, also on this topic. So if you're interested, you can have a look.
Thank you.
Anybody else, please ask questions, comments, suggestions, or you can write in the chat box. David, sir, in the meantime, just I have a question. This per prefix. Per prefix is also found in Austroasiatic languages like Khashi, then this Khmer. What is the explanation of the in regard to just I'm talking about correlation? There is any correlation between this per prefix of Austroasiatic and the Caucasian or Tibetan per prefix?
Yeah, well, not being a specialist in Austroasiatic languages, I don't want to really stick any claim there. It is curious that these are languages that are spoken right where these Tibeto-Burman languages that have independently developed similar looking prefix are located. So it could be, but I wouldn't want to speculate that far without knowing a lot more about the context situation in the distant past.
Thank you.
So thank you for that question.
Anybody else, please? If you have any question, query, unmute yourself and okay, you can ask to speak.
Alec, you want to jump in?
Do you also have a send causative in these languages, these Caucasian languages?
A send causative? Yeah, I think that I can't remember what it means in Mizo, but I think that the ter causative Ken van Beek attributes it to send. I think that one is a send causative, potentially. Is Tangi Changte here? Maybe she could tell us. After you start your talk, Alec, I'll look in my Lai dictionary to make sure I'm not misspeaking. But
okay, thanks.
So only last question.
So the sak causative I'll mention that is from the verb to make or do. So sak is a widespread word, meaning to make. That as grammaticalized to mean that, but.
May I, sir?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please begin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that was a very detailed presentation on. So anyway, I was just wondering about this fixation of or the ma in the dominant constructions, like not in the verbal lexical items, that was mentioned somewhere in the presentation. So I just was wondering whether that will be the actual positivization or the prefixation of ma or the pa, the noun. That is the first query, and the
So
next one.
Let me answer the first query so that I don't get lost, if you will. So there were B or M prefixes that didn't relate to causativization at all, which have made their way as either P or M into nouns and verbs. So you might have a verb that has actually a P prefix that it actually doesn't come from the causative prefix, or you might have a noun that has a P prefix. And then layered on top of that is the causative prefix, and then languages appear to have regularized whether they have M prefixes or P prefixes. So the rest of your question, Bijay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
You. And the last one, it may not be very, I don't know whether it is pertinent or does it make sense. I just was wondering, in these languages that you have talked about, whether the positive suffixes are absent or it's less productive.
Whether the causative suffixes are what?
Yeah, positive suffixes in these languages that you have talked about, is the less productive or it's the absent in those languages?
All right. So the causative suffixes tend to be productive, but there are instances where they're not as productive. So in Lai, for instance, you have a productive ter causative suffix. I think there's another causative suffix in Lai as well that I'd have to review my notes on Lai. But the sak causative in Lai, however, occurs, as far as I know, only in three roots, three stems, right? So there are three verbs that involve this sak causative suffix. So it's definitely not productive, but in other languages, sak is very productive. So in Hyo, it's very productive. In Ko, the cognate suffix lak is very productive. So does that answer your question, Bijan?
Yeah, if time permits, just one last question.
Just Bijan, one last, yeah.
Okay. So yes, this is out of my curiosity. In some of the data, what I have observed was is M or the P when it's occur as a suffixes. Short vowel also comes after the ma or the pa, but somewhere it is not exist also. It's only ma and only the P.
Sorry, I missed what comes after the M or the P?
Yeah, there was like swa, a vowel was coming after the pa or the ma in some of the data. What
was coming after the? Sorry, I missed.
After the M or the P.
After the M or the P, what is coming?
No, what is coming is the schwa. So
yeah, schwa. There was a vowel.
Oh, schwa. Oh, schwa.
Yes.
Right.
Schwa,
Okay.
schwa,
Yeah.
schwa.
Great. So that's just the vowel that's there in the minor syllable. So it can be a schwa, or it can be, as in the case of chu,
vowels, yeah.
It's a vowel that harmonizes with the root of the stem. So it sometimes I write that with an apostrophe. So for kumi, I write it with an apostrophe. And it just refers. It's a very short minor syllable vowel.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. But probably in most cases it doesn't get treated like a consonant cluster at the beginning of the verb. There's almost always going to be a very slight vowel in that syllable. Yeah.
So can we say subsyllabic?
What's that?
Can you say subsyllabic?
Yeah. So it usually manifests as a minor syllable in a sesquisyllabic structure, together with the verb root that it attaches to. Yeah, exactly.
So now we have to thank the speaker for his wonderful talk, for his elaborate and insightful talk.
Thank you very much.
So we have to move to the next speaker. So thank you, Professor David Peterson.
Thanks so much.
We'll invite you more, sir, for the coming webinar. And please do accept and do join us. So we'll be very happy for it. Yeah, just so we move to the next speaker. Everyone knows about the works and expertise of Professor Alexander Kopf. And just everyone knows, but in fact, okay, I will just introduce him formally. Just I take the opportunity to introduce Professor Alexander Kopf. Professor Alexander Kopf did his PhD in Latrobe University in the year 2004, and he has extensively worked on Tibeto-Burman languages of Northeast India, particularly Naga languages, and his research areas have been language documentation and description, anthropological linguistics, linguistic typology, language context in South Asia, Southeast Asia, nominalization, syntax of complex sentences, Tibeto-Burman historical linguistics, grammaticalization, morphosyntactic alignment, tone systems, language maintenance, lexicography for minority languages, etc. And Professor Alex received many grants in the form of Research Institute for Languages and Culture of Asia and Africa, Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, Ethnolinguistic Contact across the Indo-Myanmar Southeast Western China Mountains, Migration Routes, Intercultural Interactions, and Linguistic Outcomes. In the year 2019 to 2021, an academic research fund Tier 1 grant, Ministry of Education, Singapore, project title Archaeological Linguistics and the Prehistory of Northeast India, Reconstructing the Past Through Ancient Technologies and Practices and Correlating the Results with Migration Histories in 2016. An academic research fund Tier 2 grant, Ministry of Education, Singapore, project title Exploring the Crossroads of Linguistic Diversity, Language Contact in Southeast Asia in the year 2013. Seed funding for development of a Tier 2 research proposal, School of Humanities and Social Science, Nanyang Technological University in the year 2011. And Startup Grant, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University, project title, Grammatical Description and Digital Documentation of Endangered Languages of Nagaland, Northeast India in 2010. And many more grants. I'm not mentioning all, it's a very long list. And he also received scholarships and awards. Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship for Experienced Researchers affiliated with the University of Cologne, Germany in the year 2016. An Australian Postgraduate Award, Lathrop University in the year 1999. Australian Postgraduate Award in the year 1999. Australian National University Mercer Research Scholarship in the year 1997. UNESCO Scholarship for study in Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization in the year 1993. And a grammar on Mongshan Ao, and it's a really wonderful book, and we use this book for research and teaching in the university and college. And he has contributed in many international journals like, Himalayan linguistics, linguistics of Tibeto-Burman area, and studies in languages, and so on. And he also published a book, a phonetic and phonological description of how a Tibeto-Burman languages of Nagaland, Northeast India, is published by Specific Linguistics, Canberra. And he is the editor of LTBA and co-editor of LTBA and many other linguistic journals. And he has held many more positions, but I'm not mentioning. It's a very long list and really wonderful. We are really impressed of his works. We're really impressed of his position. We are really impressed of his endeavor in the field of linguistics. So I just invite Professor Alekov, and I have to just mention that Alekov will speak on nominalization and grammatical complexity in Tibeto-Burman languages. So over to you, sir, please.
Thank you, Professor Sia, for that very appreciative introduction. I think I probably should have sent you a shorter CV to make it shorter. Okay, so I'll just share my screen. Thank you also everybody who's attending this talk. I appreciate your attendance. So I'll just share my screen now. I've got one sound file, so I'll just share that too. And we better go to the beginning, I suppose. Okay, and I'll just
yes.
everything right here. Okay, so you should be able to see the screen now. Okay, I hope.
Visible.
Okay, good. All right. Well, again, thank you for my introduction. And what I'll do is firstly just go through the outline of my talk. I'll begin by discussing diachronic sources of nominalizers in TB. Then we'll look at some of the nominalizing, relativizing, and genitivizing functions in Tibeto-Burman languages of Northeast India. And then there's a number of extended functions, particularly clause linkage of what I call converbs. It's a term that's been borrowed from the Altaic linguistic tradition, but seems to be quite appropriate for these clause chaining languages of Northeast India. We'll look at some extended functions of nominalizers as tense and mood markers as well. And then what I will do is I'll show you that there's many parallel extended functions of nominalization, not only in the languages of South Asia, but also beyond South Asia. So, firstly, nominalization. If you work on a Tibeto-Burman language, then you're going to run into it for sure, because it's in all of the grammars. And it's also the source of much of the grammatical complexity that develops as well. And Matisoff, in a 1972 paper, was the first one to bring to our attention that nominalization, relativization, and genitivization in Lahu have an indistinguishable construction for all of these three functions. And that resulted in quite a lot of interest. There were many papers. Here are some. Delancey, 86. Scott Delancey's done a lot of work on nominalization. A 99 paper. Mickey Noonan wrote a great paper published in 97. I ran a workshop in 2007, 2008 at the Research Center for Linguistic Typology, and we discussed nominalization. And then I published a special issue on nominalization And I'm happy to say that all of the work that we Tibeto-Burmanists has been quite influential. It's encouraged other people to work on nominalization, and we've been in the vanguard of this work. So our work on Tibeto-Burman languages has informed the field for other linguists working on nominalization. A good example is this edited volume by Fung Hayap, Karen Grunow-Herster, and Janik Verona, I think her name is, published in 2011. I'm going to be talking about the languages spoken in particular here in Nagaland, which will be familiar to just about everyone, I imagine. And I'm going to be giving you examples from predominantly Hmong Sen, because it's a language that I'm familiar with. But I've recently been working on Sanctum and Yimkyong. I'm calling it Yimkyong because that's what the speakers in a dictionary workshop I ran in 2019 want the language to be known as, but of course it's more commonly known as Yimkyong. Then two Sal languages, Chang and Kiamningan as well, will be providing some nominalization data. And then also to begin with, I'm going to talk about Chang up here in this Sichuan area of southwestern China, because that's got some very clear evidence for how nominalizers grammaticalize, and I'll be citing the work of Randy LaPolla here. So we know that historically we start with verb-noun compounds. These are the sources of nominalizers, and quite often it's possible to identify a cognate morpheme that's got a function as a nominalizing and relativizing morpheme. Sometimes it's also got a genitivizing function as well. And the most common one is this form which is related to man or male or father. This is ba, or quite often ba or bu, some sort of vowel, pua. Or there's another one, mi, which is reconstructed in Proto-Tibeto-Burman, meaning man or person. But this is actually, it's actually the case that any generic kind of a noun can develop into a nominalizer. And here in Singapore, in the Singlish that they speak here, the numeral 1 is a nominalizer. So it can be virtually any class term generic noun which becomes a target of grammaticalization and develops this nominalizing function. And LaPolla's work, as I mentioned, has been pretty useful for understanding how nominalizers develop. He shows that there's a single segment M originating from this word man in Chang. It's used for forming relatives of relative clauses of nouns with animate reference. And he assumes that there's 3 stages of development. So first up, we've got a structure like this in stage 1. We've got a verb which is being juxtaposed to a noun meaning man or person or something like that. And the semantics is the man who verbs, or it could even be understood as the verbing man. So we've got a attributive modifier relationship of the verb to its head in green here. And at first, there's no morphology marking the relationship between this modifying verb and the noun head that it modifies. But by stage 2, what happens is that the former noun head, this suffix here, well, it was initially a noun, but it's starting to lose its independence as a noun. It becomes clitic-like, and it starts to express a meaning similar to the one who verbs, or even as a nominalized form, the verba. So this can now, if it's in this form, the verba, then this can function as a noun phrase. It can be case marked. It can be the head of a noun phrase, case marked by various case markers. It functions just like any other NP. Then by stage 3, what's happened is that there's some divergence. So now there's no meaning of man or person associated with this morpheme. It's fully grammaticalized as a derivational suffix, and it can occur with another noun and express a positive type relationship. And so for the first one, the shared argument is functioning as a relative clause. The meaning is the N that verbs, or we can get this nominalization functioning as a head of a noun phrase itself. So the verba, the noun, we can get this kind of a positive structure being used as well. And just to demonstrate, this is again Chung, and this nominalizer me. You can see in sentence 1 that it's being used here to describe a bird flying. So this is the modifying construction, and here's the head in green again. And interestingly, in 2, you can see the source of person and the grammaticalization of it occurring in the same construction, relativized noun phrase. So that's a good example of its full grammaticalization as a nominalizer. And Hopper discusses this in his 91 paper as an example of divergence. Looking at Monksen Au now, I've got a bunch of nominalizers in this language. And interesting thing is that the language keeps generating new ones. The first one, that pa, which is related to that word for male or person or father that we saw earlier, reconstructed to Proto-Tibeto-Burman, that's got a really big functional load. So it's used for nominalization, relativization, used for instrument nominalizations, ordinal, numeral, derivations, first, second, third, that kind of thing. Not for first, actually, second, third, fourth, and on. It's a masculine gender marker. It's a use for derivation of adjectives of degree, use for a form of it appears in interrogative pronouns, and we find fossilized formatives in conditional, concessive, and causal converb suffixes, and I'll show you some examples of those later. Then we've got this agentive nominalizer form as well, which is also used for relativization, fairly rarely for genitivization, but it's used a lot as a sequential converb suffix, and interestingly also a present tense marker. And another form, gen, which is used for locative nominalizations and a durative type of converb. Then we've got this purposive nominalizer, and that's developed a meaning as an immediate future tense marker. And then we've got a prefix, one of the few prefixes in the language. This is used for derivation of verbal nouns, deverbal adjectives, also one type of purposive nominalization as well. So this is a hard-working set of morphemes in this language, and probably in the languages that you work on as well in Northeast India. Here's some examples of the nominalizer prefix de and the general nominalizer being used to derive a noun, meaning a cover, from the verb covered. Past tense is the unmarked tense, so that's why it's glossed here as covered and burned, and this is should have been stung, I suppose, to be honest. But anyway, it's fairly productive to get these instrument nominalizations out. Moving on to the next slide, and we see that we can also use the agentive nominalizer in combination with that prefix there to derive an agentive noun. And we've got examples like, for example, Nungsa Ninger, ancient or ancestor or forebear. It applies not just to nouns or to phrases like this, or to not just to verbs and nouns, but also to whole phrases like Ayim Golir, the villager, which is literally in village stayer. Then here are some place nominalizations. You people are sitting on chairs, that's men in ao and mention is sitting place. This is very productive. You could use gen with just about anything, even novel expressions, like if you set up a marquee and put food in it for a wedding, then you could refer to that place as Zhongzhen, the eating place. Then we get some slight use of the agentive nominalizer for possession as well, but it only seems to apply to some semantic classes of human possessees and possessors. If it's an inalienable possession of body part, then we've got just simple apposition, like we see with Yasanaru Amang here, Yasanaru's body. But you can see here that to describe the relationship between a man and his child, it's being used here to encode that genitival relationship. Then here you can see that the nominalizers can stack up as well. So firstly, we've got this is one of the nice things about working on these languages, the wonderful syntactic complexity that they get involved in. So we've got this he called mother. So this is the old woman. He called mother's house. So quite a bit of embedding here, and nice example showing how the nominalizers stack up because they belong to different constituents in this case. Then here's an example. We could interpret this as either a nominalization, as a relativization or a genitivization, right? Because we've got two possible ways to understand this, either as the so Machena Lung, the group that didn't flee. This is an anaphoric demonstrative. You use it when you've already, when the addressee can uniquely identify the referent. So here it's got a relative clause type interpretation, but we could also understand it as being the not fleers group if we interpret it to be genitival. So actually, this just shows that genitivization and nominalization, it's the same structure, and we just have different interpretations. So it's, I mentioned down below, it's rarely encountered in texts, and it's more common to find this but form for forming relative clauses, but it is possible still to use it for relativization. Then this locative nominalizer, you can use this as well, not only for deriving nouns, but you can use it for relativization as well. So this Ami Sajin Kinawaro, we're going to the house where the person died. And when we look at relative clauses in Tibeto-Burman languages, generally we can find four types. We've got pre-head relative clauses where the nominalized verb stem occurs in front of the head noun. These are usually, they usually encode restrictive reference. You've got post-head relative clauses as well, where your relative clause follows the noun head, and these typically encode appositional, elaborating kind of information, and they're non-restrictive. You've got headless relative clauses, and a rare but still occurring fourth type is a internally headed relative clause. I only have about 5% of internally headed relative clauses in my corpus. So here are some examples of restrictive. I think Ganesh has got his microphone on. We've got an example of relative clauses. The first one is a restrictive relative clause. There's our head, and we've got, I forgot to put the closing bracket there for you. Chungli Yimti Lipa Mapango, in the time that Chungli Yimti village existed. Then in our next example down below in 13, we've got an example of a positive relativization, because we're not restricting reference to one subset of a group of entities. We're elaborating on this particular bird, right? The bird, the one that was beautiful, the one who made, she who made the bad proclamation. So this seems to be pretty consistent, but it doesn't seem to be, well, described in all that many languages. But when I look at relativized clauses in grammars of languages, it does seem to be a pretty clear pattern. Jim Matisoff in his Lahu grammar said that it didn't really make any difference to the meaning. But I find that it does, because I did a little test. I went through my texts with a native speaker, and every time I came to a relative clause, I tried swapping the meaning, the order of the constituents around to see if it was okay. And when I tried to do it with 14a here, this is the zingi rapa tangju, only the rain that comes. I tried to put rapa in front and get her to accept the rapa zingi tangju, and my consultant didn't like it. And she said that it's because it's sounding as if there's different types of rain. She said, but it's not the case that there's different types of rain, it's universal. So that seemed to explain to me then that you've got to have a non-restrictive reference here to refer to this type of referent, right? You can't have a restrictive reference because rain is universal. So that's what put me onto the idea that we have got a semantic contrast between head initial and head final relative clauses. We're making a distinction between restrictive and non-restrictive reference. Here is Kiamningan relative clauses now. And again, we find this pattern of restrictive relative clauses when you've got the relativization occurring in front of the head, and non-restrictive relativization when you've got the relativized clause occurring after the head. You might recognize this from the pair film. If you use the pair film, it's a very useful elicitation tool when you're first starting on a language, because you know what the content is about, compared to when you stick a microphone in front of somebody's mouth and you ask them to tell you a story. So Chang now, again, we find this contrast between restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses based on where the relativization is in relation to the head. So our first one, this is from the frog story that you may also be familiar with. So the vessel in which the frog had been kept, but down here in 18, we've got the relativization. Sorry, I've got the relativization here. It's following Gautak here, so it's non-restrictive. And here's Sanctum now, and again we get the same pattern occurring when we've got the relative clause in front of the head of the noun phrase, then it's got a restrictive kind of a meaning, and a non-restrictive when it follows the head, as in this example, talking about Dronga village. It's not making a distinction of Dronga from other Dronga villages. So it's non-restrictive. Okay, so the interesting thing is that you can also get clausal nominalization in quite a few of these languages. In Mongsen Ao, for example, again, we've got quite a lot of embedding. So here's at the heart of it. This is a verbless clause. Looks like I've not got my glosses here. That's a shame. Okay, so this is the bird meat is sour, and it's a verbless clause. And this is now the boy was saying that the bird meat was sour, and then this thing is functioning as a verbless clause topic. So the boy's saying that the bird meat was sour is correct. And well, I suppose, there's a possibility that we could interpret this in two different ways. We could interpret this as the boy is saying that the bird meat is sour is correct, or we could interpret it as the boy who said that the bird meat is sour is correct. So how do we tell the difference between a clausal nominalization and a relative clause? The problem is that we can't, because structurally they're identical. We have to rely on semantics here. And there's only one boy in this story. So it couldn't be the boy who said that the bird meat is sour is correct, because we're not distinguishing this boy from other boys. It has to be a nominalized clause interpretation. And the other interesting thing here is that this jang, this means male from this word apang janga. So that's undergoing a new cycle of grammaticalization, as if this language doesn't already have enough grammaticalized nominalizers. It's making more. Then we see also jang clausal nominalization as well. And here we've got a embedded clausal argument based on a nominalization as well. That manner of departure is how we should interpret this. And then we've got extensions from nominalizers functioning as relative clauses to converbs. I think these are the sources of converbs. And converbs are known by a lot of different terms. In Europe, it's gerund. In France, it's gerondif. In other languages, it might be absolutive particle, adverbial particle. In South Asia, people tend to use conjunctive participle to describe this. For example, there's one in Hindi, there's one in Nepali, there's probably others in other Indo-Aryan languages. It's a type of non-finite verb form. It's used for clause chaining, at least one type is, but it can also be used for encoding a whole range of prepositional, presuppositional meanings, similar to adverbs, expressing reason, condition, concession, and so on. Now, the thing is that they're suspiciously similar in structure to post-head and headless relative clauses. And so that caused me to look at them all and compare them to the converbs. And it just seems to me that this is an extension of the clause linkage function. And it represents a reanalysis of the referential meaning of a nominalization, because it's used for reference, right? But these converb clauses express predicative meaning. And I think we can explain this. But just to give you an idea of what this reanalysis entails, I thought I'd just show you a pair of my Levi's 501s. And most genes have got this pocket here. But a lot of people, they have different ideas about what it's for. And so, for example, when I show this to a class of students, then some say that it's for keeping keys, others say that it's for keeping coins, that's what I use it for. But actually, it's for keeping a pocket watch, because these jeans were created in the 1870s originally for miners. They needed some tough clothes. And in that time, of course, people had pocket watches. They didn't have watches. But so we could see that this pocket has undergone a reanalysis of function. So it's similar to what I'm claiming has happened to relative clauses that are reanalyzed as converb clauses. And to give you another example, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at an ornate vase, or are we looking at the silhouettes in black of two women facing each other? Well, the thing is, we can get either interpretation out of this, right? So this is exactly how reanalysis occurs. You've got one structure, but there's two possible interpretations of it. There's been quite a lot of good work done on grammaticalization in the last myself. Sorry, I just muted myself. Some people like Bybee and Lass have done some great work on grammaticalization, and Heine and Kuteva as well, Lehman. And generally they're in agreement that there's always direction away from more concrete concepts to more abstract concepts in grammar. And grammaticalization is, for example, responsible for this diachronic development of nominalizing morphemes, developing out of these generic terms and class terms like father, person, man, generally in Sino-Tibetan languages, not just Tibeto-Burman, because we get the same patterns as well in the languages of East Asia, Sinitic languages. So reanalysis is a reinterpretation, basically, of nominal constructions as converbal clauses. And according to Timberlake 77, this is a consequence of the actualization of a reanalysis of syntactic structure. And as we saw with that, that optical illusion, when we could be looking at either an ornate vase or we could be looking at the silhouettes of two women, it's ambiguous. And that's a necessary precondition for the reanalysis to occur. Because as we could see from that image, we could extract two interpretations. Well, the same thing happens with grammar as well. We've got the same underlying structure, but there's two possible meanings coming out of it. And this is due to the dual nature of participles or nominalizations. Nominals that are derived from verbs are still open to interpretation as verbs, as Harris and Campbell 1995 claim. So we've got this generic noun or class term to begin with. It grammaticalizes as a nominalizer, and then post-head relative clauses or headless relative clauses end up developing converbal clauses as the meaning shifts from a referential kind of a meaning to a predicative kind of a meaning. And there's quite a good range of these converb suffixes. This first one here is a clause chaining type of sequential converb. The others express, this one expresses next simultaneous action, maybe from a benefactive case marker. But generally you can see if you look down through these, some of them are from case markers, but many of them are from nominalizers that attach and become fused to topic particles or other case markers, and they're reinterpreted in their function. And I'll show you some examples now. So all of these clause chaining converbs are non-finite. So you can have a chain of non-finite clauses, and then the last one in the sequence is the finite clause, and that expresses tense. Now they all have semantic parity, even though they're in a dependent relationship syntactically to their final verb. And of course, understandably, they've got an iconic kind of an ordering as well. They represent the events as they occur, very much like serial verb constructions. And these sequential converb clauses are identical to agentive nominalizations, such as in 23. Der, asasa, tokotang, laplaker, her, hener, zek. And notice that I'm pronouncing these with a rising intonation, and that becomes important later on. So I translate this as a series of events. Lichapa finished cutting the meat into just 9 pieces, threaded it on a bamboo skewer, and sent Mechatsing carrying it. Of course, it uses a lot of zero and afro as well. So I'm filling in the gaps here so that you can make sense of this example. Here I'm showing that in, I just have to get my column out of the way. In Sanctum, we've got, firstly, a relative clause. This is the one that I showed you earlier. But notice how we've got a very similar form. The only thing that's different is the vowel, but pretty much it looks like it's the same source, this word for male or father. So it's being used as a relative clause in 24a. In 24b, it's being used as a sequential converb. But you can see it's got the same form in each case. So that's why I think we're looking at a reanalysis of function. Here's an example of the conditional converb in Mong Sen. And in this language, we've got the general nominalizer, but combining with the topic marker, this gets reanalyzed as being fused. So, and it expresses a conditional kind of meaning as a result. Again, it's got a very similar kind of a construction. It's similar in construction to the way you would make a post-head relative clause or a headless relative clause. And alternatively, we can use the agentive nominalizer together with the topic marker, and that also expresses a conditional kind of meaning, if you are willing. Then I just have to get my bar out of the way. I'm trying to find a good place for it. Okay, so this is an example of the locative nominalizer, that's Jin. So I said that you are sitting on Menchen at the moment, right? So that's sit place. Well, that's developed this durative converb meaning, which is for expressing durative or perpetual activities or states. Again, it's got, the only thing that changes is the tone. And that seems to be a common feature of these converbs. Their tones change. But when we look at sentences like this one, if it's dark, may it stay perpetually dark. If it is light, may it stay perpetually light. Then it's compatible with this idea of a continuing state or activity. So it's like a place in some ways. Then here's an example of the general nominalizer occurring with an instrumental case marker, and this expresses a causal type of meaning. Like in 28, ba dalam go zepana dalam na dalam ju apakjuk. Because the other birds pecked on her head became flat. Got a reason for it happening. This is very, very common. Again, it's similar to a nominalized or relativized NP. Zhang, another example where you've got this nominalizer bu combining with an instrumental marker. So lam bue, meaning because it was hot. Again, it looks very much like a relativized clause. In Himkyung, the nominalizer is ki, and ki combines with the, oh, I haven't lost it. This is the, well, actually, this is the agentive nominal, the agentive case marker, and it's combining with the ki nominalizer. So kina is expressing a causative kind of a meaning. Another example from the Pair film. And if we look beyond Tibeto-Burman, move over to Greater India, then Canada has got this form of participle, again expressing a causal type of meaning made up of a nominalizer and an oblique instrumental suffix. It's not glossed in the example, so I can't tell you what the morphology is, except that it's there. Malayalam, again, has got a causal converb, which is formed with a participle form and a nominalizer and an instrumental case form combining with the verb stem. And Marathi as well has got a causal converb, again, using a participle form, which is basically a nominalization, combining with an instrumental case marker. So it seems to be a very widespread pattern. here's Mong Sen Ao. The interesting thing is that you can use this without even having a verb root or stem there, right? So what it does is this serves to summarize the preceding information, and it provides an explanation. So it's developed into a kind of a discourse connective, depana. So I could, in fact, if I had a verb at the end of the previous clause, I could stick, like for example, if the finite verb was went, then what I could do is I could put the verb go here in between. So if the final verb is wa, full stop, new sentence, that's went, right? De wa pana, because he went, blah, blah, blah. But there's no need to actually use the verb in a tail head linkage kind of a function. So it's lost its head, but it's still functioning as a discourse connective. So this is a further extension of the function of a converb. And there's quite a few of these in the language. So just going back to reanalysis again, and what we're looking at is not an abrupt intergenerational change from one interpretation to another. They suggest that we've got something like this diagram here. So you've got your original construction, but there's a period where there's two possible outputs of the same construction, just like I suggested with that optical illusion. Now, that state of affairs might last for a long time, and maybe it doesn't ever develop into B only and A gets lost. But it's also possible that it loses one of those interpretations and a new interpretation takes over. So here's an example of how nominalizers become converbs. I can show you an example in English, because what starts out as being a nominal construction can be interpreted as a predicative kind of a meaning. For example, the prefix caught the students smoking marijuana. It could be who was smoking marijuana, but it also could express a temporal kind of meaning while they were smoking marijuana. So we've got structural ambiguity and two possible interpretations being derivable from the same construction. And we see the same thing with these nominalizers, which could be expressing predicative meanings or could be expressing referential type meanings in Tibeto-Burman languages. So how are we going for time? I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some more developments, because interestingly, what's happened is that the old mood marking system of Ao has become reanalyzed as a tense marking system, and it's got nominalizers involved in it. So that agentive nominalizer that we saw before is now used as a present tense marker. We've got an immediate future as well, grammaticalized from a nominalizer. That's the old Irialis, and probably that was the old Realis, an unmarked Realis, which has become reanalyzed. And there's an anterior as well, which I'm not going to talk about because it's not related. But what I want to show you here is how the past tense is the unmarked form, which is an unusual thing, right? Most languages don't have an unmarked past. So from a typological perspective, it's a rarity. Then here's our present tense with this form, which is isomorphic with the agentive nominalizer. And here's a form which I will show you is isomorphic with a purposive nominalizer, and that expresses an immediate future meaning. And interestingly, the purposive nominalizer form, Ru, it's identical to the future marker, except for the tone, and you can get the two together. So sorry about this immediate should be there, right? It's jumped down. So this is tsakru waro, so to pluck will go immediately. And presumably this occurs because metaphorically a purposive and an immediate future, they both allude to an intention, and that makes purposive markers ideal targets for grammaticalizations of futures, because we're making reference to an non-actualized event. So, but there's some interesting restrictions on using the immediate future. For example, it can't be negated. So I can't say I won't tell a story and use the immediate future here. I've got to use the aerialis. This "u" on the end here, it's an old declarative marker, possibly an old copula, I think, which has been reanalyzed as a declarative. And it's optional. You can have it or not have it in clauses. It only occurs in declarative clauses. So it's interesting that I can't negate an immediate future. I suppose maybe it's not logical to say what I'm not immediately going to do. I can just use the aerialis for that. Here's an example how a person asking a question, well, a bird asking a question, who's going to make a proclamation, uses the aerialis marker because, well, this is the other thing. You've got to have epistemic authority to be able to predict that somebody is going to, that you are going to do something in the immediate future. You can't, sort of like a egophoricity constraint, you can't predict what another person is going to immediately do. But then in answer to that question in 41B, Al says, I will make an announcement, and Al uses the immediate future and then immediately makes an announcement. It's about dividing the world up into periods of light and dark. You might know this folktale. So it seems like egophoricity is involved in the use of this marker as well. So how did these tense categories grammaticalize from nominalizers? Because this isn't as well understood, it seems, in the typological literature. I think probably what happened is that we started off with non-embedded nominalizations. We know that there's quite a lot of this in Tibeto-Burman languages. We have these standalone nominalizations, and a number of people have written about them. It's presumed that these constructions started off with an old copula following a nominalized clause, but the copula got deleted. And so then we had a nominalized verb stem at the end of the clause. So I think what happened then was that these clause final nominalizers became reanalyzed as tense markers in paradigmatic opposition to the mood markers, and we ended up with mood marking reanalyzed as part of a tense marking system. So this is how I would characterize what happens. We've got our verb stem, here's a clause, we've got a verb stem with a nominalizer, copula on the end, copula gets lost, and the final nominalizer gets reinterpreted as a tense marker in paradigmatic opposition to the other mood and tense markers. And I think another possibility is that rather than disappearing in Mongsen Ao, what's happened is that that old copula has become a declarative mood marker, and it's optional, as I mentioned before. Here's an interesting thing. You've got this intonation pattern. I'll just play this for you and you can listen to the intonation. So I am gamer, and you can see it, the intonation going up here. That seems to be really important because sometimes, how do you know if that's a present tense marker or whether that is a sequential converb marker of a non-finite clause? Well, I think probably what happened was that they've got the same origin, but that rising intonation serves to distinguish these two clause final markers of identical form. And it suggests to me that the sequential converb grammaticalized after the grammaticalization of the present tense suffix. And then it's only distinguished because this overlaid intonation pattern trumps the tones of individual syllables, and of course context plays a part as well. So I'm nearly done. This is how the system has become rejigged. We started off with an old mood marking system with a typically unmarked realis mood and a marked realis. We got the nominalization developing, and then the nominalizers, because of the loss of copula, ended up being reinterpreted as tense markers. So we've got that agentive nominalizer, now it's a present tense marker, and the purposive marker, now an immediate future marker. Okay, just quickly want to show you how we've got the same patterns occurring in other languages. So here in Menange, spoken in just north of the Annaponas in Nepal, we've got that per nominalizer functioning as a future marker according to Christine Hildebrand's analysis. Then in Sanctum, we've got this future or aerialis. I have to work out what it is yet. I haven't done enough work on text on Sanctum yet. But look, here it is occurring as a purposive as well. So the purposive of Sanctum has become reanalyzed as the future or aerialis marker in a tense paradigm. And in fact, I didn't have time to show you, but all of these Arawak languages have got lots and lots of tense markers that have developed out of old nominalizers like this Cho as well. And there's a paper in progress there. Lahu is another language in which a purposive morpheme is used to encode aerialis. There it is there, and you can see I've come to sell my coconuts being used to express a purpose in 45. In Hup now, jumping to South America, to Brazil, Colombia area, we've got this language Hup, and it's got a noun meaning tree or stick, and it's developed this nominalizing function. So you can see it's being used as an agentive nominalizer in 46b, rolling thing to describe a tractor or an automobile. And interestingly, here it is as a future or a purposive, but definitely it's being encoded, it's encoding a future kind of meaning in 39b, and it's a little bit reduced in 39c. It's what you expect with grammaticalization, some phonological reduction. So to summarize, we can see that nominalization is really important for developing all of these increasingly more complex structures in grammars of Tibeto-Burman languages. And we see nominalization's got all kinds of different functions: clause linkage, relativization, even tense marking. And we see correlates of extended functions of nominalization in quite a few other language families of South Asia, and then even beyond South Asia as well. So thank you, organisers, for this opportunity to share my research, and thank you to everyone who attended. I've got some references here, which I'll just show briefly, so that if you make a recording, then people can see them. And I'll just go back to, that should do me now. I'll just stop sharing. I can't hear anyone. Do I have a problem?
Sir, you are not audible.
Yeah, now I can hear you. Thank you.
I think Professor Dhiren is not audible. His mic.
Yeah.
Hello, my actually Sir Dhiren network is not so good. So if anyone has question, can raise their question to Professor Alexander Book. So those were questions. Please proceed with your question. Anyone?
So could I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Oh, thank you. Alec, thanks for that talk. That was very interesting. So I just wanted to ask about the T relativizing prefix, or I noticed in a few places there was T or T schwa as a relativizer or nominalizer in a few of the examples. Could you comment about that?
Yeah, that's the only nominalizing prefix in the language. And yeah, it's used for deriving verbal nouns. And also, interestingly, it occurs in body parts, like this is dekat, and this is dana, and danarong. So kinship terms as well, dapa, father, dani, yeah,
so follow up to that, is there a reflex of the K nominalizing prefix that Linda talks about? No? And so the T isn't that potentially, or?
I don't think so. You know, these languages, they're interesting. They've got like, okay, so you've got the T, the nominalizing prefix. I forgot to tell you that you've also got an A nominalizing prefix as well. And so de is used with kinship terms and body part terms. A gets used with just about everything else. And then also, okay. So I don't know what the source of that is. Wolfenden thinks it could be an old demonstrative. I don't know whether that fits with what other people think. I think he based that idea on a similar morpheme in Tibetan. Maybe if Guillaume is still here, he'll be able to respond to that. But maybe it's it's just a guess. The interesting thing about these languages is that quite often the nominalizing prefix and the nominal prefix that occurs on nouns are the same. They're isomorphic, but they vary from language to language. So in some languages it might be de, in another it might be a, in another it might be me. And if you look at the structure of the languages as well, you can see that it's similar to what Jim Matisoff has talked about, how you start off with sesquisyllabic structure, but the minor syllable gets reinterpreted as part of the root, and then that allows a new prefix to generate. And so you can see the layers, the diachronic layers in word formation in the language. I discussed some examples like that in my recent paper on Northern Sanctum, published in LTBA in 43.2. So yeah, I'm not sure about the source.
So is there any possibility that it's related to that element that you glossed as thus, that occurred at the beginnings of sentences?
Yeah, it's I don't know. No, I think that's different. That's a quotative, and I don't know what the source of that is either, because the word for say is sa. So yeah, I don't think it's related. The vowel's different. The initial's different.
So I meant the T schwa element. There was a T schwa element.
Okay, so you've got a.
Are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah, you've got a T schwa element, and that's used as a quotative complementizer when it's got a low tone, right? But then you've got a T schwa, which occurs as a prefix on body parts and kinship terms. I don't think they're related.
Okay.
But I don't have any evidence for it, I suppose, but it doesn't seem.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
Any more questions? So we are waiting for more questions.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, Professor Lek, there was one example, I don't really remember it now, where the same nominalizer, the marker, functions as what do you call sentential nominalizer, and also as a relative. Hello, yeah.
Sorry, could you?
So there was one example where where there was one nominalizer, one functioning as a nominalizer, sentence nominalizer, and also as relative nominalizer. So can other nominalizer also function the same, or is it a case restricted to only one nominalizer?
Okay, so are you talking about something that's functioning as a complex noun phrase? Are you talking about a nominalization that functions as
there's something like you call it. We have one marker. You call it a relative nominalizer, and also you call it relative clause. So at time it functions as a relative nominalizer. I guess it is something like a closer nominalization. Yeah, and relative clause.
Yep.
So it functions as both, where you say the meaning are both acceptable. So
yes, that example.
Does it apply? Yeah.
So okay, that's the only example where it seems to be that I found in my database where it seemed to be really difficult to say whether it was a nominalization or a relativization. But actually, we had another example, the not fleeing group. Remember that example, or the group that didn't flee. So I think going back to Jim Matisoff's 72 paper, the thing is that a lot of these you can interpret them in different ways, and so I think it's not always possible to say yes, it is relativization, or no, it's not relativization, it's nominalization, because this is the nature of the beast. It's got these multiple interpretations of function, and it's just not it's not always easy to distinguish one from the other. This has been a pretty big issue that has been discussed a lot in the literature, whether how nominalization differs from relativization, or how it doesn't differ. Is it the same in Kuki-Chin languages? Do you find that nominalizers can function as relativizers, and it's hard to tell whether there's relativization or nominalization?
I hope so. Yeah, it's difficult to make. That's why I try to get it clear from you. Yeah, to me it seems it's difficult to make that distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not a valid distinction to make to begin with, because they've got the same structure, and it's just open to interpretation how we understand it, what it encodes. Dave's nodding his head. Yeah.
Questions left from the participants? If anyone has question, please, you can ask to Professor Alexander. So if no one's questions, we can go to our. Yes.
Could I ask one more question?
Yes, sure.
Is there time? So Alec, you already commented on this a bit. The intonation obliterates the tone I think you said, or something like that. So could you comment on that a little bit more? I mean, is it does the contour just eliminate the tone of the suffix, or does it affect the preceding roots?
You know, intonation is such a trouble to work with in these languages because, of course, intonation and tone, they're realized via the same medium, right, through pitch. So trying to work on tone systems is really difficult if we can't separate the intonation from the tone. And it's probably the most difficult thing presented by these languages. So it seems that all of the languages of the Arik group that I've worked with, so the Ao dialects and Sangtum and Yimkyung and even Lota as well, they all use intonation. And then when I compare, say, Chang and Ao they've been in an intimate relationship for some time, I think because the Chang were probably kidnapping women from the Ao and also taking land off them, maybe annexing villages. So you get mixed villages on that border between the Chang and the Ao. Well, the Chang has got very strong intonation as well on these non-finite clauses. So it seems to be a very common pattern. At least in Ao, I can see that it's motivated because you've got the sequential converb, the form, right, with the schwa and rotic occurring clause finally, and now you've got the tense marker for present tense occurring clause finally as well. So if you don't have the intonation, it's not going to necessarily be clear whether you've got a clause final non-finite clause marker, sequential clause marker, or whether you've got a clause final tense marker. So it seems to be providing some kind of a prosodic signaling function in Mongsen. But the form in Chang is an, and it's different to all of the tense markers. So I'm not sure why that language has got intonation if it doesn't seem to have any syntactic purpose in the way that it does have in Mongsen Ao. But it's really, really pronounced in these languages. Do you also have strong
Professor
in Kuki Chin?
So did you ask me a question, Alec?
Yeah, just
there was a little bit. Yeah, I mean, so in Kumi, there's a very similar phenomenon, but I haven't thought about it carefully for lots of different languages. I think that we need to have a big project to look at intonation all across the area that everybody could be involved in, maybe a full conference or workshop or something just devoted to issues of intonation. So,
yeah.
But what you said about that situation was very reminiscent of what I see going on in Kumi, you know, distinguishing different clause types, right? So identical morphology, but different function.
Yeah, it even plays a part with other types of finite clauses. I remember once, so it seems that it's encoding topic continuity as well. So for example, if a speaker is talking about topic X and she's got more to say, then she will finish with a high intonation on the finite clause, and then she will continue on the same topic. And so the high intonation is saying, I'm not finished with this topic yet, there's more to come. So I was doing some experiments. I took out that clause with its high intonation where it should have been low tone, and I played it to my consultants, and they said, oh no, the tones are completely wrong. And so I played it inside the context, and they went, no, it's right, it's correct. So it's being used for topic continuity as well, it seems.
Yeah, but I think about it as the kind of continuing intonation that we even have in English. Maybe we're talking about the same type of contour.
Thank you so much. Actually, we are very sorry to say that Professor Jiren Singh sir has a very network problem, and also to other host members. So our vote of thanks supposed to be given by Dr. Mary Kim Hawkip, but since her network is not good, so from the entire team, I will give the vote of. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor K. Jiren Singh, moderator of the second session, for running smoothly second day of international webinar on Indian languages from March 18 to 2021. And also, I would like to thank Tribal Learning Group for extending support and collaborations for second day of the webinar series. I'd like to thank our first speaker, David Peterson, for his excellent talk on South Central Tibeto-Burman causative prefixes. And to also our second speaker, Professor Alexander Ko, for his wonderful talk on nominalization and grammatical complexity in Tibeto-Burman and beyond. And also thank to Dr. Monali Longalai for administrating the Zoom and also a YouTube session, and also to our scholar Nazim. And I also like to thank to all the members of Tribal Learning and scholars, and also the MA students for participating, and also to all the other participants for their participating in this session. And not the last, but I also like to thank Professor Anvita Abi, Professor Kavita Rastogi, and Guillaume Jacques from France, and our HOD, Professor S. Ganesh Bhaskar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the participants, for your supports, and also all the members of this entire sessions. Thank you so much. Before ending our program, I'd like all the participants to start your video so that we can take our one group photo. Yes, Mary Ma'am. Thank you so much, and thank you so much. Time to end our program. We'll meet you again tomorrow. Thank you so much, Professor David Peterson and Alexander Cook, and to all the members. A good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks,
Good
everybody.
night, everyone.
Stay well.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah.